Hannibal Valley.
Here.
Okay.
Present.
Tucson District.
Present. Rod Lane.
Tohono Pasquayaki,
Present, Jason Bahi.
South Tucson.
Sam Credio present.
Print Scanner. Present.
Planning Division.
Mark Hoffman, ADOT Planning.
Tucson Airport Authority. Centram. University of Arizona.
Mark Novak, present.
Peter County DEQ.
Natalie Shep, present.
And Zona Automation San Javier District.
Trisha Pablo just joined from Tohono O'odham. Just finished introduction. So we'll move on to item 2, in-kind reporting. Jeanette Duren.
All right, so as with all of our PAG meetings, regional planning efforts are enhanced by recording time donated by attendees, volunteers, and participants. PAG collects the data and time dedicated to meetings and activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. If you are paid with federal dollars, please let us know. Time spent in preparation for this meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable of the agenda and meeting materials. At the conclusion of the meeting, the session report will automatically calculate your time spent in the meeting. Time spent working on PAG RTA initiatives, programs, and special projects may also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. So if you're paid with federal dollars, please let us know, and we'll take that into account.
So item 3, approval of the July 20th, 2022 meeting summary. Has everybody had an opportunity to look over that meeting summary? Our motion to approve it.
A motion.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion or comments? By a vote of say aye if you approve it. Say yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Any object? Oh, okay. Moving on. 4th item is the regional transportation revenues update. And for that, we have David Zinda.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. It's good to see at least some of you face to face. Okay, so we have completed a state fiscal year, of course, started a new one here in July. So we do have some numbers to look back on this past fiscal year when it comes to HERP. So as you can see included in your packet, we do have the HERP revenues report and regional totals, which is composed of 12.6, HERP 2.6, and as well as your direct HERP distributions and a little bit of BLT. We're amounting to about 174 million, just a little bit over. Compared to fiscal year 2021, this is an increase of 5.6% and almost 14% higher than the 5-year average. Looking specifically at HERP 12.6, you can see that we have brought in over the last year, we've received rather, 26.7 million. That is about a 7% increase over fiscal year 2021 levels. And HERP 2.6, we're sitting just over 5.5 million collected in fiscal year 2022. That is essentially the high points of my update. I'm happy to answer any other questions should you have them.
Are there any questions from the committee? And all those that are online, just know I can't really see when you have a hand raised, so feel free to just speak up your questions if you have any. Dan.
So on page 3 of 3 in the material, there's a graph that shows percent of statewide gasoline sales in Pima County. There's a sharp dive in April 22. Do we have an explanation for that?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Mr. Credio. I have verified that a couple times. We get these reports, which are publicly available from ADOT Financial Management Services. It is a drop, but despite the drop, you can see on page, I'm just a mess up here with all my papers. Page 2, looking at just the average year-to-date gasoline sales, that's sticking at 13% is where we want to see it. So despite that blip in the radar, which don't know what caused it, we're still right where we should be, all things considered.
I have a follow-up on that. I know we've seen these in prior years, and it turns out to be an error on the side of reporting on this, either a mix-up between Pinal County and Pima County or some other adjacent county. Have we reached out beyond just doing online research to see if this is accurate?
Thank you for your question, Madam Chair. I have not done any outreach yet, but I don't believe. Yeah, I haven't done any outreach yet. I can do that certainly if that is your request, and just check and follow up for next time.
Yeah, I would request that you guys do that. Any other questions from the committee? I have a couple items. I don't see the fiscal year 23. So at the next meeting, I assume we'll start seeing these tables developed for fiscal year 23. Just some quick math based on, we had a great fiscal year 22 actuals compared to what we had budgeted. It looks like 27 million more across the 4 items that are on that cover page. So how do we see that translating to the overall tip? A quick ×4, we have over 100 million that potentially isn't programmed. So, hopefully that's maybe a discussion for the tip item, but have you guys given thought to how we're going to deal with that windfall?
I'll defer to you, Jamie. Do you want to talk about that now or
Chair,
later?
members of the committee, we are actually tracking that closely, and it'll be something that we bring up in the coming months in terms of what funding is available for programming.
And I had spoken offline with you all about some improvements, I think, to some of these reporting that would be really helpful. Along with seeing the actuals, it's really helpful to see what we budgeted for on a month-by-month basis or forecasted for. So we have some kind of tying it back to something instead of just a number. And we used to also receive the HERF 12-6 start of month balances and the RTA fund balances with these reports. So I think it'd be great to get those back in here. Back in the day, we used to have 40 million or so sitting in 12-6, and we would kind of see that balance of RTA. So I'd make that request for future reports.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, appreciate the conversation we had recently about that, and we've actually started on exploring changes to the report through our internal review and hopefully to our committee meeting. Have time to hear for this.
Understood, yeah.
You had asked for David to research that blip. Can they bring that back to the next meeting as well?
Yes, please.
Absolutely.
Get back to us in this forum, public forum on what that was. If there's no more questions on this item, we will move on to the next.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. So item number 5 is our regional mobility and accessibility plan update. Annette, you're in.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. We have a few updates this month, and as I mentioned last month, this will be a reoccurring agenda item pretty much every month till the end of the year for sure. The first item is I just wanted to thank everyone for meeting your August deadlines for your project Explore and also getting Dave Zinda your local fund contribution. We really appreciate that. And for those of you who needed a little extra time, you still circled back and got that information to us. So that really helps us stick with our timelines and then also to bring information back to this committee in a timely manner. So we received most of those responses, but if yours is still outstanding and you need to touch base with us, as always, we're always here. Give us a call and we'll help you out. With the local fund contributions, our next step is to develop that methodology reflecting the money and the figures that you gave to us. So that's the next step. So we're working on that. We did receive a lot of questions on how we're going to use that information and what we're going to do with it. And that's what Dave and Jamie are tasked with. So we're working through that. And if we haven't answered all your questions, we're going to get to them, or it'll be part of something that we present here at this committee. And along those lines, if there's anything we need as we're developing that, Dave and Jamie will reach out to you, or Zonia and I, So you'll see a lot of correspondence from all of us. There is always going to be time for feedback. So that's a point I want to make. So we did receive some comments where, we're excited to see people get ahead of us and be excited about working on this. And so there's going to be time for questions and answers about the funding and the methodology. So as you remember, I think it was at the last meeting, David presented some methodology for how we're doing federal and state funds, and then local funds will come, and that'll be a discussion here at the table. So there's going to be plenty of time to look at this stuff, and we'll be in touch. Let's see. On the Project Explorer, another big thank you to this committee for going through and cleaning up your projects. There were questions about splitting up projects into separate projects, and that'll happen at the next phase. We did run into a glitch with updating project costs. So you might have clicked on that red project cost and tried to do an update. And if it didn't work, let us know. Josh and his team have been in there trying to fix that little glitch. But just like with the finance plan, there's going to be opportunity probably for the next year to go in there and update those project costs. As you remember with the last Rmap update, there were several times, especially with the RTA projects, where cost estimates were changing, and we had time to incorporate that. So if it didn't work correctly this first time, we have plenty of time to fix that. Our next step will be to open the Project Explorer for new projects and splitting up projects, as we had mentioned at a previous meeting, and that should happen early to mid next year. Land use and AVM modeling. Unfortunately, Josh isn't with us today, and he had some updates on that. So he will be back at the next meeting. I think really the only point for this group today is that tomorrow is the PopTech meeting. And so a lot of the agenda items that go through PopTech feed into the land use and AVM modeling. So if you plan on attending, please do so, or please send your appropriate staff member to participate in that meeting. And the agenda for that meeting and the materials have been posted, so you can just go right online and take a look. That's all I have, Madam Chair. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Are there any questions from the committee?
I have a
Yeah.
question. Thanks, Madam Chair. One of the questions we had, Jeanette, is will there be an RMAP subcommittee?
That's a very good question, Madam Chair, Mr. Creedy out. So what we're trying to do is keep most of that discussion here at TPC, because this is the group that, has the most influence and sway on that. There are going to be pieces that come through for the RMAP that we may call a subcommittee, and it would probably be a subcommittee of TPC or, a delegate. We foresee that maybe happening, later on. Right now, we're in that beginning phases of the plan. We're just doing existing conditions, data collection, trying to clean up these project lists and get through some of these sort of technical detail steps. In the actual plan development phases later on in the process, there may be an opportunity to do that if we need to, but we'll just kind of play it by ear. One thing that we're being really conscientious of is the fact that there are so many planning efforts going on, RTNX, TIP development, this committee, RMAP, there's so much going on, and we don't want to over tap into the same people, right? So our stakeholders group is a lot of the same people that we see at these meetings. And so one option might be to invite them to a TPC meeting or work through it that way. So when we get to that part, we'll definitely keep that option on the table.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was going to ask a follow-up on that.
Sure.
I know the last meeting we requested there be a timeline or schedule of some of these upcoming events. We keep hearing later on and coming up. Be good to kind of put that on the calendar. I know we've gotten one recently for RTA Next. We have it for the TIP development. It'd be nice to layer this one in just so we can kind of look at that. So I'd request that at least for the next meeting, if not before.
Okay. Yeah, Madam Chair, members of the committee, absolutely. And fortunately, some of those other efforts have posted timelines, which of course impacts our timeline. So yeah, we'll be putting something together for sure.
Madam Chair, Jeanette. So I think in a previous update, we were talking about preparations for public outreach and
Yes.
getting the public involved in understanding what RMAP is. And we totally get the complexities of RMAP versus RTA and all of that. Has there been rethinking on that? And I guess I'm not seeing it in the update, so I'm wondering where you guys are with that.
Absolutely, Madam Chair, members of the committee. We have made some steps towards securing a contract with someone to help with the public outreach, and that's happening like last week, this week. And so it just there wasn't time to get it on this month's agenda, but we are taking steps in that, and we'll have an update at the next TPC.
I know the last update, we kept calling it a mini update. So having only been limitedly involved in the 2016 last big update, do you guys have a sense, like what was the timeline we spent on that 2016 versus the time we're giving ourselves this go round? And how are the processes for those two differing?
Okay, Madam Chair, members of the committee, that's a really good question. So yeah, I mean, it's a 4-year cycle. So the timing of the events is pretty much similar, right? Because we still have that same amount of time to prepare the document. Obviously, variables have changed since the last one. A lot of things that we heard during the last update were, how are we going to incorporate RTA and RTA Next? Well, as that played out, we didn't have to, because we finished the RMAP before RTA Next. So that's kind of the same situation we're in now, is following those other efforts and seeing if we're going to have time to incorporate them into RMAP, or if we're going to get ahead of it. So we're watching that, and we're going to incorporate that. So there will be a level of involvement, a level of change in the plan, that a lot of it is sitting on that balance of what happens in those committees with that project. So, we've been working on the project list. We're going to work on the public outreach. There's going to be a considerable, we're anticipating a considerable level of project list change. The last update, we did not delete any projects. We moved them into reserve. So there's going to be a lot of just project cleanup, rethinking what's on there. Revenues are changing clearly, so that fiscally constrained number is going to be different. And then how do we move forward? So we foresee it being a bigger cleanup, a bigger overhaul. We see a different level of public involvement, and that's going to kind of go hand in hand with what's happening with RTA Next. So like I said, it's that 4-year cycle, and just dealing with the variables that are in play this 4-year cycle that are different from the last 4-year cycle. We anticipate some change.
More than a mini update,
Yeah.
but not a full update like we did before.
Well, Madam Chair, members of the committee, I foresee it being a full update. I mean, there's a lot of things in our transportation world that just don't change, right? Like our funding sources. If there's new funding sources coming in, that's going to be reflected. There's projects that are going to be on the project list that have been for a while. There's going to be discussions in terms of how funds are spent and where the allocations go, and those things are going to be reflected. So there's elements in the RMAP that are requirements, so we'll see those. But as the industry changes, and as funding changes, and as priorities change, that will be reflected. But we will be meeting the federal requirements of what we need to have in that document.
I think that's really important, especially because of the shifts that we've seen with pandemic and the more stable, more robust telework situation we've seen, and then the introduction of connected and autonomous vehicles. We've talked about all these technological changes and travel behavior changes. We're talking 2055. So I think it's important that we get the experts in the room involved in that deliberation, so that we can kind of come to grips with what's the right scenario for RMAP 2055 in terms of what do we expect out of telework? What do we expect for the introduction of connected and autonomous vehicles and other technological solutions, micromobility? What does transit look like into 2055? So the earlier, the better, I guess I would encourage you all to have those conversations and tap these people who are talking about those issues all the time.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, that's a good point, and hopefully we'll have Josh's group be able to present to us soon on the AVM And I mean, that's a totally different way of modeling. It's a totally different way of looking at the network. And, you know, in my opinion, that's a major overhaul in and of itself. So the outcomes of that effort and just the utilization of new data sources is going to play into it for sure.
If I may, Jeanette. Madam Chair, members of the committee, I just wanted to add to Jeanette's remarks with regard to the light update versus the full update. Yeah, unfortunately, you don't have the information today to share about your public engagement tool, but that's really exciting and much more robust than the last process, I would say. So in the coming months, you're going to hear about this new tool that we're investing in that's going to really allow us to tap into the ideas of the public for the process. Exciting.
And I think Mark Hoffman's hand is up online. For those that joined after the introductions, it's very hard to see raised hands if you're on the Zoom. So please feel free to just speak up and join the conversation. So Mark, did you have something?
Yes, just a question, and this may have already, you may already stated this, Jeanette, but what is based on your schedule, what is the anticipated approval of the RMAP? What date are you working back from?
Madam Chair, members of the committee. Yeah, I mean, we're looking at 2024. Hopefully, I mean, I can't say with any certainty when we're going to bring it to this committee or when we're going to bring it to regional council. That's the goal is to hit, you know, sometime in 24. And, you know, we'll see. A lot of it too is contingent upon, you know, just schedules of meetings and when regional council meets and availability and things like that. But that's our target.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions from the committee on this item?
One question. The majority of the projects that are in the RMAP, are they identical to the RTNX? A lot of us are drawing projects from the RMAP into the RTNX.
Madam Chair, Jose, it's a good question. Some of them are. Some of the RTNX projects that have been submitted were projects that have been in the previous RMAP. So, you know, we're currently developing the project list. So we haven't, you know, solidified which projects are in and which are out. I think it's safe to say that if a jurisdiction put a project in for RTNX, that it's a priority enough to show up on the RMAP project list or, you know, a portion thereof. We did go through an exercise internally to look at if there's any differentiation between those two lists. So what we're seeing in the project, the RTNX project list and what we're seeing in the existing RMAP. So, you know, that's definitely something that will be, you know, looked at as we solidify the RMAP project list. We will want to make sure, I mean, we won't know exactly when RTNX will be approved versus when the RMAP is going to go through, but, you know, we're going to track what's going on in RTNX to make sure that we don't have to do an RMAP amendment if we can avoid it. So it's just a matter of, you know, which project goes first. And, but yeah, we have to keep that in mind.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Related to that, thank you, Madam Chair. Knowing that you're looking at the project costs by year of delivery as per federal requirements in the new review, and understanding that that was not necessarily the approach with RTA1. Maybe this is a question that can't be answered at this point in time, but reconciling those two disparate approaches is probably important to get our head around earlier rather than later. If we have RTA Next projects reflected in RMAP by year of anticipated delivery, does that mean that's what's going to be going to the voters, or how is all that going to mix together? It's more food for thought than anything, but we should probably make sure that we're simpatico on all of that stuff.
Sure. Madam Chair, members of the committee, you know, that all plays back into that fiscally constrained bottom line number. So, you know, there might be projects in RTA Next that are in those out years. So maybe, you know, if we have to consider our fiscally constrained number. So if those projects are all, you know, 20 years down the line, we'll have to consider, you know, what are the near-term projects so we don't, you know, overshoot that fiscally constrained number. So yeah, it's going to be, you know, an analysis that we'll have to go through.
there's no further discussion on this item, we will move on to the next. So, excuse me. Item 6 is the overview of the fiscal year 2024 through 2028 Transportation Improvement Program Development Process. And Mr. Jamie Brown.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. It's good to be with you and appreciate the opportunity to provide an overview of the FY 24 through 28 Transportation Improvement Program Development Process. So what is a TIP? Most of you are familiar, but just in case not, TIP is a Transportation Improvement Program, and per the federal regulations, it is a quote unquote prioritized listing / program of transportation projects developed and formally adopted by the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is PAG. PAG's TIP covers 5 years and it's federally required. So what are some of those TIP requirements? It must be updated at least 4 years, excuse me, every 4 years. Must be multimodal, so including roadway, bicycle, pedestrian transit, and other modes of transportation. And it must be fiscally constrained so that we're not programming more funds than can be reasonably expected for each year by funding source. In your packet, there is a notice of funding availability memo that includes, for this process, that includes an introduction and key points, programming priorities, funding availability and staff contacts, a schedule of key milestones, information on eligibility and available funding, and resources. So it's important that we review some of those key considerations for this particular TIP development cycle. So programming of regional funds must continue to prioritize the delivery of RTA projects. This commitment is in place until further notice and extends beyond 2026. So that priority of delivering of RTA projects is something that was a priority during the last TIP development cycle, as many of you are aware. At the January 2022 PAG Regional Council meeting, the motion included that the Regional Council provide official board positions for identifying a proposed plan and funding to complete the projects as part of the original RTA plan, and define the specifics of how to address any RTA projects if they are moved into RTA next. Thus, regional funds available in fiscal years 27 and 28 will be considered committed but unprogrammed for RTA projects until the RTA board determines how to program those regional funds on a case-by-case basis. Also, the RTA budget is adopted annually by the RTA board for the following fiscal year. So that just occurred in June for FY23. And please note that RTA funds will be programmed at the board's sole discretion. Funding sources for the programming of new projects will be limited to FTA sources as described in the notebook. So this is very similar to the cycle 2 years ago, where again, for new projects, it was limited just to those FTA funding sources. So the Transit Working Group will serve as the selection panel for transit projects. And then PAG RTA transit staff will provide Transit Working Group members with information on the project application process and other details. So I wanted to go through the anticipated schedule of key milestones. Please note that it is subject to change. This is our current understanding of the process. We may need to include an extra meeting here or there, and we'll just adapt as we need to. And we'll update this committee during the process of any schedule changes. So like previous cycles, it will be about a 10-month process starting in August and ending in late May with formal adoption by the Regional Council. So that first bullet point, TIP fiscal year rollover meetings, those were successfully completed, and we're just wrapping up the numbers in the database for that. We distributed the TIP NOFA via email and also in the packet for this committee. In October or November, the Tip Subcommittee will review draft revenue projections and also the projects in the current fiscal year 22 through 20. That's something we talked about at the individual TIP rollover meetings, about having a larger committee meeting to discuss all the projects in the current TIP. From November to January, we anticipate that the TPC will review draft project lists as they're available. So we've heard feedback that in the past that the committee wanted to see those lists as they're available, but also all at once. So we're going to do both. And I'll get to the all at once soon. In December, our technical work will begin internally Our staff will be doing travel demand modeling, the GIS mapping, the Title VI analysis, et cetera. In January, we anticipate that management and regional council will review the available draft project lists. February, that's when we hope to bring the full draft project list to TPC. That's that TIP database report of everything. In March, we anticipate bringing the preliminary draft, having a preliminary draft TIP completed for TIP open houses. So you've seen that thick TIP document with all the text, the tables, et cetera. We hope to have most of that done by March. In March, again, management and regional council will be able to review the draft project lists. And then we'll hold the open houses in March, usually late March. In April, we'll ask TPC, this committee, to review and recommend approval of the final draft TIP. And we'll also commence the 30-day public hearing comment period. In May, we'll ask management to make the recommendation to approve the final draft TIP. We'll also in late May conclude the 30-day public hearing comment period, bring those comments to the regional council, which will hold a public hearing at their final meeting in May. And then we'll be asking them for approval of the TIP at that late May meeting. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. We have other members of staff here as well who Jim DeGroot is here to represent the RTA as well. Thank you.
Jamie, are there any questions from the committee, either here in the room or online? Again, if you're online, please just speak up. Sam?
I have a lot of questions. Thank you, Madam Chair. Jamie, if you could go back a few slides to the beginning of your presentation. Right. Go forward. Forward a couple more right there. So I wanted to talk about this statement here about the commitment of funds beyond 2026. I understand the language in the regional council motion January 26, but I'm trying to understand, did regional council specifically say in the motion that we cannot program any funds beyond 26 other than RTA projects, or is that PAG's recommendation for the TIP process?
Thank you, Mr. Fugo. Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm not quite sure I understand your question, but let me try to explain. So as we all know that the current RTA plan sunsets in 2026. However, this commitment, understanding that we've got projects that may still need funding beyond 2026, makes it such that we can continue to prioritize our commitment to delivering on those projects beyond 2026.
I think that probably sums it up about right. We don't have as explicit a direction as I think you see. Okay. But that is clearly our understanding of the intent. We'll continue to work with them on trying to clarify.
If I can follow up, can you remind me what the item was on the January 26th regional council meeting that this action took place on? As I recall, it was about maybe voting representation or structure of the committees, which seems like quite a departure from having such a very specific action with funding as it comes to this program.
Excuse me, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. That's my recollection as well, is that it was really kind of focused on the final meeting where in previous meetings of the regional council, there was conversation about governance and representation. And this motion was a multi-part motion that addressed some of those issues that are specific to representation on committees, but also included this other provision as part of that motion.
Okay. I kind of agree with what Sam's initial point was, which is, I think it's quite a expansion of the board action that's written on here to saying that there's a commitment of RTA funds to some indefinite point in the future. To help kind of quantify this, it would be nice to see the scale of the problem we're trying to solve. How long will we be in this pattern of only dedicating regional funds to the completion of the RTA program? Is it 2 more years? Is it 5? Is it 10? I think it's that cost to complete exercise that has been happening a little bit out of the meeting structure. So how are we going to tie that exercise into the development of this TIP?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So yes, I think many of us would want to have something really concrete with specific dates. And I think right now, just for August of 2022, we're still waiting to get that direction of what projects are going to be changing in scope and what other projects might be shifted into RTA next. And what are the updated cost estimates for the remaining projects to know what our difference is and what we need to potentially supplement with different funding sources and how much we have for each fiscal year. So there are some outstanding questions that we just don't have answers to at this time. So I don't know if there's anything more to add, but I think we're just going to continue to, as we move along for this TIP development process, as we get direction from the RTA board about how projects are going to be programmed or shifted into RTA next, we'll incorporate that into the TIP development process. So that's why we have that statement that FY27 and 28 are committed to RTA, but for the time being, considered unprogrammed. But we get further direction.
So will it just appear that we don't have projects in those 2 years because we can't show the funding with a project? And does that meet the obligations of your initial slide, which was programming the revenues in a fiscally constrained manner to projects?
I think that what you just described, Madam Chair, members of the committee, would be kind of a worst case scenario for this TIP development process, is to not have, be at a point where we don't have direction for the RTA projects of what's going to be in and out by the time we take it to region. We're hopeful that we'll get that direction. We can incorporate that, but we'll have to think about, there are a lot of other projects that would, be included in the 5-year TIP. And if there's some way we can incorporate that funding, as a placeholder element in the TIP until we get that direction to show that fiscal constraint, we'll consider that. But we're just going to have to be flexible going forward, and as we get direction, we'll incorporate that as much as possible. Is there anything more, Jim, that you have?
No, I think that's.
Yeah.
Jose?
I just got one question. I know back in 2017, there was a study done by against Ella College where they identified a $300 million shortfall in the RTA, and then they came up with 3 options: option A, option B, and option C. Option A, extend the RTA next for 3 years to make up the shortfall. Option B, cut off projects. For obviously option A and option B were not viable. And option C, okay, well, let's use the regional fund from 2019 to 2026. So we all went with that option. Is there a follow-up to that study? So no, we think we need to go beyond 2026 because in light of all this shortfall of revenues or increase in cost, construction costs, we need to go an additional 2 more years. Is there a follow-up to that study?
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the committee, Jose, that's a great question. I don't know, Jim, if you have a response to that. I'm not familiar with that.
And we're just trying to pin this thing. I mean, at first we're told 2026, and if you need more time for the shortfall, whatever that is, I just want to know if there was a follow-up or amendment to that study. Or
I'm not familiar with the specific study you're referring to. I know back in 2014, we had our first real major review of the RTA revenue estimates. And we were at that point in time finally seeing some clarity on what was happening with the recession. We were finally starting to claw back a bit. When we were looking at it prior to that, we hadn't found the bottom. So what I would tell you is that this is an ongoing effort, that every 3 years or more frequently, we go and have re-estimate the estimates or re-estimate the revenue of the RTA through the end of the RTA. And we've done it looking out well beyond the termination of the RTA to help inform the CAC and the board on what kind of funds that we're going to be looking at well beyond that. In fact, it'll inform the Rmap as well as to what kind of revenues we might anticipate from the existing half-cent TPT. It is an ongoing conversation that we're having in terms of the cost to complete. I know I requested from the jurisdictions, what's expected to cost. We've gotten responses. We're putting it back together again. We do have direction through our executive director to present it to the RTA board, and we will do that on a continuing basis. They've asked us to present at the August meeting, so we've got materials that we're developing for that. This summarizes what we've received from the jurisdictions with respect to the costs to complete. Now, one of the things that's still a big unknown and is subject to a lot of speculation is what kind of inflation we should anticipate through the end of the RTA. And there's no real good answer. I mean, we've seen some estimates, but we're in an area or a period of time that, we're influenced very heavily by international external affairs that, whether they perpetuate or if we look at market systems that are, or rather, if we look at supply chain issues getting resolved and becoming less stressed, things like cement and plastics and metal products may become more available, and we may see a decline in the costs. And we have seen some decline in fuel sales costs recently. The international oil picture has a big impact on things, and we're looking at never before seen numbers for the prices of bitumen and diesel fuel. But we also saw huge costs back in 2012 that we have only recently exceeded. So things go up and down. It's cyclical, and we did see prices stabilize and actually retreat a little bit after the last peak. And so I guess I've gone down a path that I don't need to go to at this point. But what we're going to be presenting is what we think the current costs are of the projects, and we'll have to deal with future challenges in the future because we don't know what they are. We can kind of hedge and make some estimates, but we don't have the answers beyond what we believe it costs today. So anyway, that meandering conversation I hope was helpful. Probably too meandering, but
So Jim, I have to follow up on that. A lot of what's happening is information being gathered on a one-on-one basis. And this committee hasn't had an opportunity to kind of look at all these numbers that have been submitted. I think that's one of the values of a committee like this, is that there's another set of eyes. We all have experience delivering these large scale projects. Mm-hmm. So it's challenging for us to advise up to those above us in further committees on what this cost to complete looks like when we are not given any insight on that.
Well, the sequence is probably the frustration. You'll be getting that information. We've been asked to present it to the board first, and that's the direction I've been given. Absent that, that's the way we're going to be handling that. But that information will certainly be available to you. And I see this as an iterative process going forward. So there will be the opportunity to react to it. I'm sure we'll hear from all in the future. If you think that we need to make adjustments, we're certainly welcome to hearing from this committee about it. That's your role, is to give us feedback on it. But I think the electeds have, as I understand it, they want to see it first, so that they're prepared for it. They see it at the same time, not necessarily reacting to things. So that's my take at this point, and that's the direction I've been.
Jim?
A follow-up question, Jim, is for 27 and 28, will it just be the named projects that we're anticipating will roll into those years, or will the categorical elements also be funded beyond 26?
Are you referring to right at this point in time, the obligations that we have associated with those named projects may carry beyond the end of the plan? We would need to look for another tranche of funding for anything that's operational or the smaller projects. So if RTA Next goes forward, then at that point in time, my expectation is that there'd be funding for categoricals if that's what's put into the RTA Next plan. And every indication is that they won't.
Essentially 2026, 27 and 28 is going to be roadway element projects, right? The ones that were not completed by the end of 2026, they're going to roll over to 27, 28.
Yeah, I think
for the funding, that is.
Yeah, I think this is, as I see it right now, my recommendation would be that we not program projects to compete with completing the projects right now that we've currently got in the plan. And if we go forward with RTA Next and it funds and allows for the extension of some of the projects further out into the future and funding for them, then we would have to revisit those dollars that we've currently held back from program.
You guys have that information now, like which project's gonna have to spill over to 2017?
Well, that's a conversation that we're having with our
Ongoing.
jurisdictional partners, and, I know we've got 2 projects that have been identified. And we've asked for, volunteers, we haven't gotten those yet, but, that's something that we can work through and maybe ultimately a function of the time to deliver them, are they right?
So Jim, I know that the board took action on 2 of the projects, Silver Bell north of Camino, whichever, Del Cerro,
Del Cerro.
and then the county's First Avenue
Yeah.
project. So should RTA Next not pass, are we saying that we'll deliver those with regional funding in the future? I mean, have we looked at what that nuance is there if there is no RTA Next? I thought you almost
I
kind
think
of touched on that.
that's a conversation that we can speculate on, but ultimately it's the choice of the board how they want to handle that. As we see it, we've got a voter directive that we need to figure out how we can deliver these projects. And, the projects that were deferred or put into RTA Next are projects that have scopes that are different from what is in the RTA plan. So I think there has to be a decision later as to whether or not it's augmented in the case of Silver Bell, or if everybody feels confident in contracting a project, as in the case of First Avenue between Orange Grove and Item. Those are decisions that at this point, from my perspective, are over the horizon.
Other questions from the committee?
I just had a question about the schedule. In the schedule, Jamie, you referenced the Tip Subcommittee. Can you share with us what the involvement of the subcommittee will be, and just describe that a little bit more for me?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Mr. Credio. So previously, during the TIP development process, the TIP subcommittee played a really important role in terms of guiding the development of primarily the RTA project, that's last development cycle. So as well as review of the revenue projections and programming numbers. So we anticipate that the TIP subcommittee will do both again this time.
So, Madam Chair, that brings up, I guess I'm a little confused as to the role of the TIP subcommittee and TPC and the role of the board, when my understanding is that the direction from the board was for the TIP subcommittee to recommend fund programming to complete the RTA plan. And that's the action of record from 2014. I understand they want to see everything and they want to be very involved in where the money goes, and ultimately it is their decision, and it always has been. But our discussions with electeds through our channels have emphasized the need to involve the subject matter experts, the project delivery folks, in helping craft the recommendation. And I believe it's their expectation that the recommendation be deliberated through a body like this as it goes on for the consideration of the board, who's ultimately going to make the call of what gets funded and how. So it sounds like that's not really going to happen. It's just going to be something that's going to be done by the board, and the subject matter experts will stay tuned and get a feel for what funding might be available for their projects, and then scramble to deliver. So that just seems like a disconnect there. And I'm just having trouble following what I understood was the action of record from 2014 and the implication that the board may want to bypass that and see things separate or prior to TPC or TMC or any other groups weighing in on it. I haven't found that explicit direction. The best I'm seeing is they're talking about establishing a position. That doesn't necessarily mean they have a position on the fiscal 27-28 funds. They just know they need to figure that out, and they're not quite sure how to do it. But let's put a pin in that And we'll figure out what we're going to do with the non-RTA 27, fiscal 27, 28 funds. So not sure if there's a question there, and sorry to dump all that on you. I'm just trying to navigate through. I've been through, I don't know, 25 or more of these TIP processes, and I've never seen it like this. I've never seen it where the subject matter experts are not the ones saying, hey, here's the funding we have, here's the project needs, this is the best fit that we're recommending. Let's get that up to the board so that they can figure out what works and what doesn't. They'll tinker with it. They'll make some adjustments. We'll get a TIP in place. This is fundamentals capital improvement program planning. And it seems like it's being approached on a case-by-case basis, which makes me incredibly nervous as we're trying to deliver the RTA1 projects and figure out which of those might need to be bumped into RTA next. My instinct tells me it'd be best to have the full funding picture and then make the call for what needs to shift into RTA next, knowing that we don't have enough funding for that and the timing is not there. These are the best candidate projects to shift into RTA next. Seems like that's been reversed a little bit, and we don't have a clear idea of what the full funding picture is, nor do we have a full idea of what the cost to complete looks like. We know it's a moving target. It's always going to be a moving target, but we have to have, you know, the best available information to make an informed decision. So I'll stop talking now.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no. Is someone?
Yeah, this is Thomas Garcia with the town of Sarita. I had a question kind of along the lines of what we're talking about right now is with the TIP subcommittee. It's been a while since I've been participating in these meetings. So I've probably missed out a lot, but the TIP subcommittee, my understanding was that was absorbed into this TPC. Is that been reinitiated? Is there now a separate TIP subcommittee that is supposed to go through this process, or is that the TPC now? And then again, so I guess that's my first question. My second question is, it sounds like this presentation or analysis of what is needed to complete the RTA, and then the funding application to that is going to happen in the next regional council meeting. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Mr. Garcia. So thank you for your questions. The second one might be a question for Mr. DeGroot to answer. With regard to the TIP subcommittee, that continues to be an active committee, but it meets on an as-needed basis. So really, in the last 2 years, it's really just met for the TIP development process. I think the last TIP development cycle, we had 3 meetings of the TIP subcommittee. And it's composed of some of the same people of the TPC, but also the alternates for some of the member agencies. So we anticipate using kind of a similar approach where the TIP subcommittee will be active and will work with and share recommendations with the TPC for this TIP development cycle. And I do want to kind of respond briefly to Mr. Casatano's comments. Just thank you for all that feedback. It's helpful for us to hear that. In terms of all the different cycles that PAG has gone through to give TIP, I would say this is a unique situation. We are facing a situation where we're developing a whole new RTA plan. We're considering shifting some projects in the current RTA plan to that plan. And we're still trying to figure out what the cost to complete, what projects are going to change in scope, what projects are going to shift. And it's happening at different committee levels. So I think after all of this we've gone through all these steps, and years in the future, we may be able to go back to the way in which programming was done here at PAG through a process that may be recognized, where we have an all-day TIP subcommittee meeting. We're able to open up a call for projects for more new projects, not just RTA commitments, but others. But right now we're in a situation where we need to meet the commitments of the current plan and also consider the RTA next plan. So I would say it's a unique situation. And then with regard to the interplay between the RTA board and the TPC, yes, we are awaiting direction from the RTA board in terms of, on a case-by-case basis, how they wish to program those fund projects. But for the the TIP subcommittee meeting, we do anticipate having a review of all the projects in the current TIP. So we want to go project by project and have that conversation about what is the status of each of these projects. And then maybe hear what are some recommendations from each of the project sponsors about what's going to happen. That's what we're thinking about. And also have an opportunity to review the revenue projections. I just wanted to provide a little bit of feedback. I know there's a lot there, Paul, but just a little bit of a response. And then on the other question, Jim, do you have a response from this one?
Excuse me, Madam Chair, this is Jason Bahi. Just wanted to inform all members of the committee as well. I just wanted to inform you all that I need to step out for another meeting. I apologize. Thank you.
Then,
Madam Chair. All right, just as a follow-up to Mr. Brown's comments, yeah, on the record, your comments are on the record, so thanks for that. Mr. Garcia did mention that, these are discussions and decisions that are going to happen at regional council. So, for the sake of this agenda item, to stick to the discussion that we need to have today, your comments are noted, and those discussions, as Jamie and Mr. Drew both said, are going to be forthcoming. Some of those agendas have been made available. Some of them will be made available in the next couple months with TMC and regional council and RTA boards. So, for the sake of this committee and today's discussion, got to stick to the agenda item.
great. I'll follow up on that then. So you mentioned this is a unique process. You're right, RTA Next has not been a strong discussion point, but the decision to change the development process, was that an actual action taken by one of these bodies? Or is this change in process at the discretion of PAG and RTA staff?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I would say that it is incumbent upon staff of the MPO to ensure that we're following the requirements for TIP development, but also ensure that we're following other requirements for RTA, et cetera, and to develop a process that's in compliance with that. But it is up to the staff to recommend a process that will ensure that we're compliant. Excuse me.
But except for RTA Next, nothing has really changed in terms of the funding and everything else we've looked at over the past 15, 16 years that we've been in the current RTA. It's the same ingredients for revenues that we're looking at, the same challenges with project delivery. Those types of items are the items that a TIP subcommittee and a TPC, we're ready to have those conversations. I will volunteer us, welcome the opportunity to look at how to solve this problem. And I understand that they'll come up in a future meeting. And if it needs to be a more formal discussion at a different body to understand what this process is and why it has changed so drastically, I think that conversation can and will happen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I think for me, what I've witnessed is the biggest change happened when that policy from 2014 went back in 2020. That committed regional funds to art delivery on RTA commitments. So that shifted the process where we could not do an open call for projects, for new projects other than transit, and to make sure that the process was guided really by ensuring that we're meeting those RTA commitments. We did change based on that policy.
I don't know, Jose, I look to you because we've gone through this many times, that the prioritization put RTA named projects as the #1 priority, but the NOFA always included a full funding picture, which it does not this time. It included performance scores for the projects that were submitted. So this is the first time I've seen a NOFA that did not include a look at all of the revenues, even a mention of the 12.6 and the STB. So it is a departure, for sure.
Members of the committee, I think that comment was made at the last meeting. I did check again to the NOFA from 2 years ago. It did not include revenue estimates for 2.6, 12.6 STBG. However, we did take those to the TIP subcommittee in August, and we did present those at the TPC meeting. But they were separate documents.
Okay, well, we can talk offline more about that and look back into history. I think it's the full funding picture that we want to emphasize. you can't solve a problem when you're only looking one project at a time, because something's going to sneak up on you. And I think that's what we're trying to express. Let's look at the full funding picture so we know what we're tackling together. Are there any other questions on this item? I do have one. I noticed there's not 5311 as part of the transit funding conversation in the NOFA. Will we be seeing what our projections are for that transit funding?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, 5311, I don't know that we typically included that funding source in the NOFA.
I agree. I'm just wondering what our projections are for that funding source.
Oh, okay. I can inquire with our transit administrator.
Okay.
And I would say, just to follow up, that we anticipate bringing this item forward at subsequent meetings. So we have a September meeting, October meeting, November meeting. We want to bring updates to this committee and have these conversations. So please continue to bring your questions and comments, and hopefully we'll have more information to share. Thank you very much.
Well, if that's the conversation on that, anybody else online have any additional comments? We'll move on to number 7. So future agenda items. And just to remind everyone, this is a time to list what we want a future agenda item to be, not to have any discussions on it because it's not actually posted on the agenda. So are there any items for future meetings? Dan?
Yes, Madam Chair, I would like to see an item on the cost to complete RTA projects. If we're being asked to review the draft list for the TIP in November through January timeframe, we're going to need to be informed on that cost. As you mentioned earlier. And then I did have a few follow-up items. You had asked for David to look into the April 22 blip in HERF revenue, as well as a schedule for Rmap and an update on the public outreach program.
Any other items? I'd mentioned I'd like to see an item on some of the federal funds that are coming through all of the new bills and our approach, how we can best work together as a region to be competitive on those grants. You know, obviously, congratulations to the city. It was really successful, but this is a big part of our funding picture and how we need to look at developing projects moving forward. So if we could add that.
Madam Chair, given the programming responsibilities that are inherent with this committee, I'm wondering if and when and how the regional transportation alternatives grants are going to come through this committee, either for information or recommendation. You know, that's kind of brewing and moving along, but probably good to bring it through this committee, given that we do have programming responsibilities, at least on record.
Any other items for future agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair, committee. This is Thomas Garcia. I was curious, and maybe a moot point, but the RTAG applications, if there will be an update for the next meeting on the outcome of that process.
That seems like a good next step. We should see that soon.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other items? If not, we'll move to item 8, adjournment. Thank you all for coming. Motions to adjourn.
So moved.